You are listening to Your Servant is Listening podcast. Exodus 1, verse 17, NLT. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. First of all, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. This is a reenactment of a scene from Jack Zulu and the Girl with Golden Wings by S.D. Smith and J.C. Smith. Jack was helpless. All he could do was watch the horrific scene. The father elf looked back at the tall elf behind him, and the tall elf said, "In order to gain something, you have to give something." The father elf nodded and approached his daughter. He drew his sword. His daughter said, "Dad? What are you doing? Stop, Dad. You don't need to do this. We can figure this out. You can still do the right thing. Please, don't do this." Jack wanted to do something, but there was nothing he could do. Jack turned away and heard the terrible scream of the elf's daughter, and Jack heard the sound of the elf daughter's body crumbling to the ground. Jack looked up. There was the elf's daughter, laying down in her own pool of blood, dead, killed by the hand of her own father. The same father who had looked at her with love not that long ago. For power, for his own selfish desire, slayed his own daughter. Later on in the book, Jack tells his mentor, "That was awful, horrible. How could somebody kill their own child?" With deep grief in his eyes, his mentor told Jack, "It happens in your world too, just in another way." In Jack Zulu and the Girl with the Golden Wings, there are two fathers. Both contrast each other. I've told you the first father, an elven father who kills his own daughter, and the second father who gives his life up for a child. I would definitely recommend the Jack Zulu books. Personally, I think they're the best books written by S.D. Smith and J.C. Smith. And of the Jack Zulu books, the second one was my favorite, but there are more to come, so we'll see. Maybe the third one is my favorite. The next story is a bit of a review for this podcast. I interviewed Mrs. Nelson on her dog Coco, but I'm going to tell the story again because I think it has an important point. Mrs. Nelson lived in a house right next to some neighbors. Coco was in a really bad place. Coco and all of her family were underfed, and they didn't have any lines or fences to protect them, so they could roam along the streets as they pleased. But Coco was a little tiny puppy that couldn't see or hear very well. So there were a couple times when Coco almost got run over by a car. Mrs. Nelson, having a big heart, decided to start feeding Coco and her mom and her sister. The mom dog was wild and wouldn't let Mrs. Nelson get close to her or her puppies. And as time went on, Mrs. Nelson realized that feeding the mom dog and her two puppies wasn't going to work for her, for she had a lady that worked at her house, and the mom dog would start to attack the lady. So, in order for the lady not to be hurt, Mrs. Nelson decided something had to be done. Time went by, and Mrs. Nelson got a chance to get the puppies without the mother dog knowing. She swooped them up and brought them into her house and rescued both of them. The mama dog was not happy, but it was necessary for the puppies' survival that Mrs. Nelson take them in. Years have gone by since the rescue. Both puppies have grown up and live with families that take care of them very well and love them. Moving on to the next story. Here in this missionary center, people often have to move around to different places. And lately, the center has been getting smaller and smaller in size, which means there's less and less people to take care of pets. We've bumped into this a couple of times. A couple of families said that if they couldn't find someone to take care of their pets, they would have to put their pets down, because it would be irresponsible to leave your pet without anyone looking out for them. In this story, let's say there was a family like that. They had been searching and searching for someone to take care of their pet, but had found nobody, and they were about to leave in 1 week. And in their desperation, they posted, "Someone please take care of our pet. If we can't find anyone, we'll have to put our pet down." Let's say you saw the post. What if you had the means to take care of this pet? You have plenty of space and plenty of food. What would you do? We came into the same situation here. There was someone who had posted and needed someone desperately to take care of their pet. In my mind, I went back and forth. Yes, I could take care of the pet. I had room, I had space, I had time. I had everything that I needed to take care of this pet. And yet, I hesitated because taking in this pet would mean that I would have a busier schedule and a messier house. My biggest concern was that I had so many pets already, ones that I was taking care of and ones that were my own. Would I truly be able to give them the love and attention they needed? As a family, we prayed and we decided to take the pet in. And now that time has passed, looking back, I'm glad that we took in the pet. Not only was it fun to have the pet around, it was also very rewarding to us as a family to know that we had saved a life. The first story, from Jack Zulu, the father elf kills his own daughter. And the second story, Coco is saved by Mrs. Nelson. And the third story, the pet is taken in by our family. So, what do all these stories have in common? Maybe you have your own answer, but my answer is that they all have to do with life and with death. As some of you may know, September is an important month. First of all, September is Suicidal Prevention Month, but also on September 11th is the remembrance of what happened in the Twin Towers in America in 2001. So many died that day, and so many have cancer because of the debris from the Twin Towers. And so many give their lives to suicide. And there's yet another significant thing that happened in September, the presidential debate. I'd like to read to you an article by Jim Daly from Focus on the Family. In this article, he's talking about the presidential debate. One of the more pointed parts of last night's exchange involved the now half-century plus debate over the sanctity of life. Specifically, ABC moderator Lindsay Davis erroneously said, "There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born." Miss Davis is mistaken. Babies who are born after failed abortions have been legally abandoned and have died. That is infanticide. As Jim Daly continues on in his article, there is a Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which would protect babies who survived abortions and would give them life-saving care. This act has not been accepted by Congress and is not a law. So it is legal in America for you to kill your baby, even if the baby survived an abortion. This article is rather heavy, but there's one part of it that's really encouraging. Focus on the Family remains committed to serving vulnerable mothers and saving as many preborn babies as possible. In fact, our Option Ultrasound project has saved over 500,000 lives since the program began. Your generosity is allowing us to minister and share the good news of Jesus Christ and bring the hope he brings to those navigating dark times. Allow me to be frank with you. I want you to know up front what I truly believe about abortion. I believe abortion is evil, satanic, and murder. And I believe it needs to be stopped. So, to go back to my stories. The first one, with Jack Zulu, when I first read that story, it filled me with horror and dread. I was shocked that the father would kill his own daughter. And yet, when I thought about it afterwards, I realized that that is exactly what abortion is. It is murdering your own child, or allowing somebody else to murder your child. The reason I brought up two pet stories is because of the dodo. It's one of my favorite YouTube channels to watch. They have such heartwarming stories about people rescuing pets and loving on them. Looking at one of their videos right now, I see that they have 16.4 million subscribers. And this video called Man Rescues Injured Hummingbird While Walking His Dog has 515,000 views. It has no dislikes, and it has 8.6 thousand likes. I won't get into all the statistics and numbers, don't worry. But the point is that the dodo is a very popular YouTube channel, and lots of people like their videos and stories. So why did I bring up the dodo? Oftentimes, the dodo brings up some topics about animals. Some of these controversial topics like, should you put down your animal or not? And in popular opinion, many people believe that it is wrong and irresponsible to put down an animal that is in good health. And I would agree. Animals are beautiful creatures that God has created, and God has created us as their guardians to watch over them and to take care of them. So I think it is irresponsible to put down an animal when it is in perfect health. I believe we should put as much effort as we can to bring joy and comfort and love into an animal's life. Even if it's hard or expensive or heartbreaking. Yes, I believe those things, but I also believe that it's wrong to treat pets as our children, because children come first before pets. In my main news outlet and in other areas, I've seen people who treat their pets like children, sometimes humorously, putting shoes on them, carrying around in baby carriers, taking them even to museums. There's even a certain museum that has a night that's called Cat Night, where you can take your cat and look at all the famous statues of cats from Egyptian times, and so on. Don't get me wrong. I'm filled with joy, and I enjoy things like the dodo. I enjoy hearing stories about people caring about pets. It fills my heart with such warmth when I see so many pets and animals rescued. But I would really like to make the point that if there are so many people out there that care about pets, then I call you, people that care about pets, care about children, care about babies. I also have a couple more stories. First, I would like to dive into Exodus. I'll be reading from Exodus chapter 1 and 2. Starting at verse 15. Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. When ye help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. Why have you done this? He demanded. Why have you allowed the boys to live? The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, the midwives replied. They are more vigorous and have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time. So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. I love how in the Bible sometimes you get this big picture of what's going on. 'Cause oftentimes in real life, we only get a small detail of a picture, and most of the time we don't really understand what the big picture is, or what exactly is going on, or why people are doing what they're doing. One thing that Exodus gives us a bigger picture of is why Pharaoh is doing what he is doing. Pharaoh is terrified of the Israelites. They are multiplying like rabbits and growing more powerful every day. He's afraid the Israelites will turn against Egypt along with Egypt's enemies, and that they'll escape the country. Pharaoh likes having slaves. He likes having these people work for him and do all the hard labor that no Egyptian wants to do. And I like this detail in verse 8. Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. I thought this was an interesting detail. Pharaoh had forgotten all about Joseph and all that Joseph had done. Joseph was an amazing man. Joseph interpreted dreams and visions. He saved Egypt from 7 years of famine, forgave his 12 brothers, and in the long run, made Egypt prosper. In Joseph's time, Egypt was a powerful nation, and Joseph was only second to Pharaoh. And yet, this Pharaoh in Moses' time has completely forgotten Joseph and all that he had done. As for us, maybe God does something incredible in our life, and yet the world doesn't see it as much. Or maybe the world sees it as much, but forgets. But I'd like to encourage you with this. Joseph's story is written in God's Word, and generations of Christians have heard his story. My point being, the world may forget what we've done, but God never will. And God noticed something else that happened in chapter 1 of Exodus. God saw the midwives spare the lives of those baby boys. And not only did God see them, he rewarded them. He gave them families of their own. And earlier, before that verse, it says God was good to the midwives. It doesn't specify how, but we know when God is good to us, God is good to us. When God delivers, he delivers. And I've seen that happen in our own family. God saw that we cared about children, so he blessed us with mercy and adoption. Long before my mom was ever married, God gave her the heart for children and to adopt. It became her dream, and God gave her her own family. These brave midwives found themselves in a very tough situation. We, as the readers of the Bible, get the advantage of seeing a bigger picture, and we know that the midwives won't be killed by Pharaoh for this, and that they will be blessed by God with their own families. And yet, the midwives didn't know that. The midwives were faced with a choice. Would they obey Pharaoh, the most powerful man in Egypt that could take their lives just like that? Or would they do the right thing? These midwives saw the power of Pharaoh and knew what Pharaoh could do to them. And from my homeschool, I've learned that many Egyptians believed that Pharaoh was a god himself. We don't know much about the midwives, and we don't know how they saw Pharaoh. But Pharaoh was not a man to mess with. It was the culture to obey Pharaoh in every way. And since this world belongs to the devil, the father of lies, the king of death, this world is going to follow its king. It's going to promote death and lies. You could say that death and lies are this world's culture. We must be vigilant. We must speak the truth and live by the truth. And since this world of death treats life as disposable and unvaluable, we must fight for life and treat it as holy. That's why they call it the sanctity of life. Life is holy and should be treated as so. And now let us go into Exodus chapter 2. About this time, a man and a woman from the tribe of Levi got married. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. I just love that detail. Every mother should see their child as special, as a beautiful gift from God, as someone to cherish and to protect. Starting at verse 3. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. The baby's sister then stood at a distance, watching to see what would happen to him. Soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the river bank. Then the princess saw the basket among the reeds. She sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This must be one of the Hebrew children," she said. Then the baby's sister approached the princess. "Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" she asked. "Yes, do," the princess replied. So the girl went and called the baby's mother. "Take this baby and nurse him for me," the princess told the baby's mother. "I will pay you for your help." So the woman took her baby home and nursed him. Later, when the boy was older, his mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. The princess named him Moses, for she explained, "I lifted him out of the water." Baby Moses is born. He has a rough beginning. His mother has to hide him for 3 months. Must be very hard to hide a baby for 3 months and to keep him quiet and everything. And then, after 3 months, he's put into the Nile River in a basket, hidden among the reeds. I'm no mother, but I am an older sister, and Moses' older sister must have been a bit stressed watching her little baby brother in the Nile River. Yes, on the edge, but still. The 4-month-old baby in the Nile River. I mean, when Mercy was a baby, we would have never brought her close to a river. Mom would hold her on the bank, a safe distance from the river. Can you imagine taking your 4-month-old baby and putting it into the Nile River? Yes, in a basket waterproofed with tar, but still, it feels like many things could happen. What about snakes? What if the river decided to have a stronger current in that moment and took the basket downriver or tipped the basket over? This doesn't particularly feel like a safe place for a baby. And yet, this is where Moses finds salvation, and ironically in Pharaoh's daughter. Yes, the same Pharaoh that ordered Moses to be murdered in the Nile River. His own daughter saved him. God can tell some pretty amazing and ironic stories. And even though I call this a story, I truly believe that the story of Moses and the Bible is true. Every single word of the Bible is God-breathed and is true. And now for the last story. A man is walking along a beach. I imagine him with a fishing pole, and overalls, and a white beard, and a straw hat. He has no shoes, and his overalls are rolled up so that they won't get wet from the waves. The man looks down and notices sea stars stranded along the beach, drying up in the sun. The man knows that if the sea stars stay out on the beach, that they will dry up and die. So the man, in his pity for the sea stars, begins to pick them up and toss them back into the sea, where they will find life. Another man approaches the original man, who is still throwing sea stars into the ocean. The other man says, "You know you can't save them all. What's the point?" The original man holds up a sea star and throws it into the ocean, and replies to the other man, "Well, it matters to this sea star." This little tale is so profound and so true. We can't save everybody. We can't save every homeless man on the street, every orphan child, or every baby that's threatened with abortion. But to make this story even more complete, I believe God places certain sea stars into our lives that He empowers us to reach and to rescue. Mercy, my little sister, is a beautiful picture of a sea star God placed into our lives. A sea star that changed my life forever and has brought me so much joy. Sea stars can come in many shapes and sizes. It can be a baby that's threatened by abortion. It can be a child that needs to be adopted, a pet that needs a new home, a suffering friend, parents that are aging, or a brother and sister in Christ that are struggling. Maybe they need prayer, or maybe they need financial help. This world is filled with so much need and is already filled with so much death. Let us instead bring life to this world. It's true that we can't save everyone, but it's also true if we all pitch in and help those little sea stars that God brings into our lives, that together, as a multitude, we can save millions and millions of sea stars. So please, let me ask you, do you have the means to help someone? Do you have the space, the time, the supplies, the love? Has God pressed on your heart someone or something that you must help? Then please, by all means, go and do what He is calling you to do. Let us be like the Father who gives His life for His child, rather than taking His child's life for Himself. Let us be like Mrs. Nelson. If you see an animal suffering, go out and reach out to it. See if you can do something. It doesn't have to be something big. It can be just something small. Be like the midwives in Exodus, who fear God more than powerful Pharaoh. This world is terrifying, but God is even more fearsome. It may be easier to go with the culture, but it isn't satisfying, truly in the end. What God has to offer is much more than what this world has to offer. And when you reach out to a sea star, it might change your whole life and bring so much joy and color to your days. As God's creation, God has created us to long for and to fight for life. What joy it is to know when you've saved a life. This is quite a long episode, so thank you for listening this far, and God bless and have a great day. And this is for God's glory.